Welcome to East Coast Winemaking, the podcast that brings professional winemaking experience from popular wine regions on the East Coast of the United States to wherever you are. I'm your host, John Monier. I'm a Finger Lakes winemaker, and I'm excited to provide easy access to educational and entertaining interviews with other winemakers and industry professionals. In each episode, we'll cover the background and unique perspective of my guest on how they approach the craft of winemaking. I'm excited for the opportunity to learn from seasoned wine pros and hope these interviews can be informative to both colleagues in the industry as well as relative newcomers. Feel free to email questions or comments to eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com and follow us at East Coast Winemaking on Instagram to be notified when new episodes come out. If you're interested in checking out my wine called John Albert, you can find info on that at johnalbertwine.com. Hello, everyone. Happy middle of October. I totally had intended to post this podcast a number of weeks ago. I've been sitting on it in my back pocket for a while, but the harvest of 2024 has absolutely been kicking my butt. I keep hoping to have an opportunity to put this up, and then, I'm at the winery till 11 or 11:30, and all I have time to do is shower and go to sleep. Thankfully, today is not that day, and I'm finally getting around to it for all of our benefit. I hope y'all enjoy the conversation I had with Peter as much as I enjoyed having it. We talk about a number of interesting things. As usual, a lot of his winemaking philosophy and beliefs. He also has a super interesting story of how he got into winemaking. I had no idea, but was so tickled to hear him talk about how his entrance into the industry was. I'd also just like to thank you again for giving me some leeway while I learn to be a podcast host. I feel like with every episode that I take, I'm learning a little bit more and becoming a little bit more wise and knowledgeable about the direction that I'm trying to take each interview. I know early on I was interested in trying to be a little bit more in the weeds and kind of wine nerdy, and in some episodes I've already done, I feel like maybe I go a little too far in that direction, and I'm trying to find the sweet spot between being able to interest people who are particularly wine knowledgeable as well as to include people who maybe know slightly less. So I think that I'm getting there. This one's a little bit in the weeds, but I just wanted to fill you in with where my head is regarding, exactly what I hope to achieve with this podcast. So on that note, enjoy. Okay, thank you, Peter Becraft, for being my guest today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
We were just chatting for a couple minutes and we've been laughing, so it seems like you're in an okay mood.
I'm ready.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you in advance for pouring us some of this Gray Label barrel ferment Chardonnay.
You're welcome.
Gray
Series.
Gray Series.
Yep.
It's delicious. Okay, so to start at the beginning, would you please tell me your origin story, when you first got interested in wine, and then the series of events that led you up to be head winemaker at Anthony Road? I should mention that ahead of time.
Sure.
Anthony Road, located on the west side of Seneca Lake. Please, whenever you're ready.
Great. Origin story. Fargo, North Dakota. Cold fall day, October 1. That's where I started. My journey into wine happened later in the 90s. I was living in New York City with my now wife Carrie, and I was going to grad school at Hunter College for fine arts. My degrees are fine arts, concentration in sculpture. And
Really? I
Yep.
had no idea. Did you have in your mind when you were in school that you might be a sculptor?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was going for. But then in grad school, I started to think otherwise, and it was becoming apparent that it was going to be very hard to make that happen. And that there's a lot of politics and a lot of you need a patron
in the professional art world.
Yes,
interesting.
Yes, and so I left the program and I started working for a fashion photographer. And I was working in his studio. I was pressing clothes to start, and then one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I'm a casting director for this photographer, and I'm producing his days, hiring the models, hair and makeup, setting up the shots, and the schedules for the photographer.
How old were you at this point in your life?
I was, let's see, 94. I'm probably, 20, 25 to 28-ish.
Okay.
And then Carrie, my wife, she was working in restaurants, and she worked in the pastry department of the River Cafe, and eventually became the head pastry chef at the River Cafe. And it was through her work that we would have to go out to eat at restaurants to keep up, see what everyone's doing. And we would go with friends from the restaurant, and it was great. Go to a really nice restaurant. They find out where you're from. They say, put the menus away. We'll bring stuff out. And with that came really nice wines. So I'm out of grad school. I've left the art world. I'm still doing things, making art. Now it's moved to collage because I didn't have a studio. And I'm working for this fashion photographer, and I'm working with a lot of people in that industry that are very passionate about what they do. They're very artistic. They're very passionate about fashion. And they're from all over the world. Great people. I was realizing that I wasn't as passionate about what I was doing there as they were. And through going out to the restaurants with my wife and her work people that she worked with, the connection of fine food and fine wine was starting to really interest me, and then I, as they say, you get bit by the bug, and before I know it, I'm buying every book I can about wine. I'm reading every magazine I can about wine. This is really before the internet was huge. That shows you, that dates it, and so there wasn't a lot of that. It was still going to a library to get books and stuff, bookstores.
Well, can you explain for some of our younger listeners what a bookstore is?
Store that sold books. And then in New York City, you've got probably one of the best wine cities in the world. So there were tastings, importer tastings happening all of the time. Great wine shops. I'm into it. I'm starting my own little, my own little cellar in the, collection of wines in our apartment. I'm hitting up the local wine shops, asking all these questions that I can. And we're vacationing in wine regions. It just so happens that wine regions are in really beautiful parts of the world. So I'm I've got this hobby. 9/11 happens, and you walk to work, and that unfolds before your eyes. The next morning, both Carrie and myself, we made a promise to each other that we were going to follow our passions.
Wow!
Right? Life is too short. Life is too short to be unhappy, and so that was the September 12th. So from there, it's not immediate. I didn't know if I wanted to be in restaurants or at a wine shop, or I wasn't even thinking production. And I took the Windows on the World wine course with Kevin Zraeli, which was really great. Just an amazing teacher. And every day I'm coming home from work, and I'm like, to Carrie, when are we gonna make this happen? So we're looking to get out of the city, and this is in 2006, and we're looking at regions to move to. because we know that we're not going to be able to afford to buy a house in New York City. We're not going to be able to start a family. And so we're looking in Long Island, found out quickly can't afford that, right? We're looking at the Hudson Valley. And at that point in time, people are moving away from Long Island and they're going to the Hudson Valley to get their weekend homes. Because Long Island was getting saturated and it was pricing people out, even people making a lot of money. And so they're going to the Hudson Valley. And so we couldn't make that happen. We've been to the Finger Lakes a lot. And so we start looking up here and realize, we can get our foot in the door. In February of 2006, I had started what I called my passion job, which was working at a wine shop in the financial district. At that point, this is 5 years after 9/11, they're starting to work on reopening downtown. So think about this. That time frame right there, people deserted downtown Manhattan, right? And for good reason, horrific. And so they're giving incentives to people to start businesses and to live down there. And so this wine shop called the Green Grape downtown opened up, and I got a job there. And I was still working for the fashion photographer. And on a Friday after work, I would get off and work at the wine shop. I worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I had off Monday at both places. And after a while, I had two jobs and one didn't feel like work. And that's when I knew that this is making sense to me. And at that point, I'm already really, turned on by the history of wine. I love history. The connection. I'm looking for something that connects to people, something that means something. Casting director for a fashion photographer is important for that, but it doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of people.
So it sounds like that feeling that you had when you had the realization that this job at the Green Grape didn't feel like work to you was the beginning of your realization that it was the beginning of you fulfilling the promise that you made to yourself and to your wife about doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
It made you feel like you were on the right track.
Yes, it did. Yep. And at that time also, my wife had shifted out of the restaurant business. She was just getting burned out, high burnout rate in the restaurant business. And she started working in the studio as well. And at that time, she learned to make chocolates at the River Cafe. And she started her chocolate business on the side, this boutique chocolate business, Carrie Mo Chocolate, Candies and Confections, which she, is doing to this day. So she's starting to make that happen as well. 2006, we came up here and we were looking at a place in Naples. We came up in May of 2006. It's pretty quiet that time of year. We were out tasting. We had an appointment in the afternoon with our realtor. And we are heading back to this cottage that we just had rented. It was very close to where Fox Run is. And it was like, we got time for one more. We could probably fit one more in before lunch. And we're coming up to Anthony Road. And I knew about Anthony Road from the farmer's market in New York City at the Union Square.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
They still sell wine there to this day, as I recall.
We stopped 2 years ago.
Yeah. Take that back.
Yeah. But for 27, almost 30 years, yes, every weekend, all year round. So I knew them from the farmer's market. I wasn't like I'm not buying their wines. I'm not a fan or anything, but I am a fan of what's coming out of New York State, all regions of it. And I'm seeing the potential. And so we come in, we taste here at Anthony Road. And I'm really like digging what I'm tasting. It wasn't necessarily the Rieslings that were blowing my mind. It was this 2005 Pinot Gris.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm like, whoa, this is so flavorful and rich and deep and I'm really I wasn't expecting that. At the time, Johannes Reinhardt was the head winemaker, and he came down for lunch, and we got introduced to him.
Mm-hmm.
And Carrie asked him, what do we have to do to get a barrel tasting? And right, yeah. So if you don't ask, you'll never know.
That's absolutely the case.
And so he's like, let me eat, go out into the garden, hang out, and I'll take you up there. And that's what happened. So I'm now got a couple months at the wine shop. I know, my German wine grapes and obscure Austrian and German wines. So I'm coming prepared. We're tasting here in the cellar. It was 45 minutes, an hour. It felt like 10 minutes and went by so quick. It was really like organic and went really well. Johannes is walking us out to our car, and he says, I'm always looking for someone to help during the harvest. And that's when my wife says, he'd love to do it. Because she's sick of me coming home every day, right? When are we going to make this happen? Oh, we got to do it. And so that's how it started. And we exchanged numbers. I would call him every couple weeks just to check in. And John, he would kind of try to talk me out of it.
Really?
Yeah. It's
about getting into the wine industry in general?
About coming up for the harvest, because, I have a feeling that he didn't know me from anybody.
Sure.
Right. And he just offered me a job to come up. I'm coming from the city, right? I'm a city slicker coming up. I haven't worked in a field ever, except mowing my family lawn in the suburbs. And so he would tell me, it's going to be very hard work. It's going to be 6 to 7 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day. And at that point in my life, I'm like, I want it.
Give it to me.
Yeah. When you live in the city, you want what you don't have, and that is the connection to nature. I don't necessarily think that people that live in the country want that connection to the city. I think they're a little afraid of it. And people that are in the city are also afraid to leave the city because what am I going to do? How am I going to survive? Where am I going to get Thai food? Where am I going to, these kind of things. And so I came up, my wife and I, we have an Airstream, right? It's the same one that's parked out there.
Yeah.
And I brought that up, pulled it up beginning of September 2006, lived in it while I worked the harvest. There were a lot of Petes and Peters. There still are in the industry. So early on, I was known as Airstream Pete. That's how they kept me separate.
That's pretty slick. You seem like an Airstream Pete, the city slicker Airstream Pete.
Yeah, and that's how I got into the business. So that harvest, I just wanted to learn as much as I could. Johannes was a great teacher. Also, at that time, the assistant was Chris Gerling, who now works at Cornell. And Chris was amazing as well. I had a lot of questions. They answered everything that I put towards them. I also didn't want to come in and be like, well, I know this and I know that. Because nobody wants one of those kind of people.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So learn as much as I could, work as hard as I could, and I wanted to make them want me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Your hope was to be brought on after that harvest. I mean, did you see that there was that opportunity?
I was hoping that could happen. Yeah. Yeah. That was what I was hoping.
And after all of Johannes's warnings, that first harvest, what was your experience in terms of the difficulty level? How you perceived it?
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard. But I was using muscles I'd never used before, and I was exhausted, and but I was so turned on by what was happening.
Mm.
You know, the smells, the feels. The community was amazing. I'd never fermented anything in my life before I came up here, and nothing in my life. And so I was just completely stoked. I had at that point I had stopped working for the fashion photographer when I came up for the harvest, but I was going back to work for the wine shop. And the wine shop, they were great because they fully encouraged it because they knew that I would come back and I'm going to have this knowledge about how to make it. And the wine shop, working in the wine shop, was great because I was now selling wine. I was now a guide for people because wine, going into a wine shop for the average consumer is absolutely, it's too much.
Yeah. Even as a professional, when I walk into wine shops and to look at the walls of wine, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, varieties that you don't know from places that you're not familiar with, it's impossible to know what the right decision is.
And so to sell the wine, you've got to know how the wine tastes. And we had the guy I was working for, he was great about opening bottles so that we knew what it was like, and then we could sell and teach the consumer. And it was great. I learned so much because it forced me to study about all the regions, about grapes that were in the store, the regions in the store, the producers. We'd have producers come in. And then also you have people that work for distributors that are coming in constantly, right? Whether announced or unannounced, wanting to taste you on this. I got these wines from, Alto Adige. Let's taste you on some of these, Taralegos and Gewurzes. Okay. And so the manager, he would always pull me in. That was great experience. I would recommend that for somebody that's trying to get into the business. Go work at a shop. Do that, because it will force you to. You're already studying this anyway, right? Put that to some knowledge. Be a guide. Help someone feel comfortable about wine. And once you've got someone that loves that recommendation you made, they're coming back to you, right? And so that was really beneficial in building up my knowledge of the wine world at large.
Sure. So at this point, you're still at this wine shop. How do you make the jump from working still in the city to being full-time here in the Finger Lakes and in the winemaker position?
Right before I was leaving the harvest, this was in November.
Of what year?
Of 2006.
Okay.
I approached John Martini, right? John and Ann Martini are the owners of Anthony Road. And I said, John, my lease is up in April of the next year, and Carrie and I are going to move up here, and I want to work here. And John said, cool. And that was what happened. And so they wrote me into the business plan.
Wow.
Yep. And it was amazing. We came up in April. Johannes and Chris actually came down and helped us move. Carrie was floored. Like, oh my God, and Johannes was like, Carrie, you are now part of the family, and it was, and that's what it is. Working for this place, the Martini's family runs the business, but it's a larger, extended family that they really look out for you, and so that was amazing. Came up. The first 2 years, I worked from April to September in the vineyard, and September to April in the cellar. So I was working with Peter Martini, the vineyard manager. So from, before bud break, and through to the harvest, and then in the cellar from the receival of fruit, the harvest, to the making into the bottle. So I really got the full spectrum, the full circle, the cyclical part of this, of both both sides.
At this point, I think that this is something that's different from region to region and certainly from country to country. But here in the Finger Lakes, and I expect in other regions in the U.S., it seems very popular for the thing to be that there is a winemaker and they're separate from the vineyard staff. Whereas I know it's more popular in France to have like a vigneron, somebody who is both taking care of the vines and making the wine.
Yeah.
So at this point in your story, did you have in your mind that you wanted to be a winemaker? Did you know for sure that like it was the cellar life for you and the vineyard work you got and were interested in, but not as into it in your heart?
Or no, I don't know. I don't know if I felt like that. I loved working out in the field.
Could you just have easily been a vineyard manager as you became a winemaker?
Quite possibly. Yeah, quite
like
possibly.
Maybe in the multiverse, there's another version of the of events where you end up a vineyard manager.
Quite possibly. Yeah, but also I do like the coolness of the cellar, and so I know I made the right decision. And I don't necessarily I never had the. Maybe at one time before I got into the business, had a thought or a dream of having my own vineyard or my own business. I'm very happy with the setup that I have, working as part of a team, and not having it to be doing all those aspects of the business aspect. I'm a specialist. Right. That's something that I know that I am. And so I specialize in what it is that I'm doing. And like an artist, I like to have my independence and freedom to do that with a patron who can help me not have to think about the overhead. Right. So
you're kind of like the cool uncle where you have like all of the good parts and none of the bad parts of needing to be the bad guy. You know, you get to be the head winemaker, the guy who everybody looks up to after they drink this amazing wine. And they're like, man, this guy's the man. But you don't have to deal with any of the rigmarole of owning a business.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah. So the vineyard was, I really enjoyed that, and it was so essential to learning about the making of the wine too. And but where they needed me was in the cellar eventually, because the assistant position had opened up, and I was offered it. I turned it down.
Really?
I turned it down at first. Yeah, because I felt like I still. I hadn't given Peter Martini the time that I had promised, and I also knew that I wasn't fully competent. I didn't know everything. I didn't feel like I knew a lot in the cellar yet. And you know, if you're the assistant, there, worst case scenario, you could become the head winemaker quickly. And I wasn't ready for that yet, so I turned it down. Yeah, and then the opportunity came again a year after that, and I took it.
Looking back from where you are now that you're a head winemaker who has dealt with a number of assistant winemakers, do you feel like that was the right choice to have turned it down the first time?
For me,
yeah.
Yep, no regrets.
Well, it's great that it had the second opportunity to come around and they didn't just write you off. I mean, not that that's something that it seems like they would do. Like you say, it's a family here.
Yeah.
And especially if they understood where your heart was, you know, just feeling like you needed a little bit more time to get your bearings. I mean, how can you blame somebody for that? I think that's very wise.
You know, working up here in the cellar, John, you know, always says, this is your house. You know, there's no micromanaging from the family. They trust me to create the wine, and they trusted Johannes as well. And so it was Johannes actually who saw that in me, and kept at it.
Sure. This touches a little bit one of my questions, so maybe if I can just interject it while we're here, which is, do you feel as you're making stylistic decisions that you have carte blanche to push the wine style out of the cellar in whatever direction you want? Or do you feel that there's kind of an Anthony Rhodes style that, maybe was started by Johannes or before him? I'm not sure exactly, that you're perpetuating that, or some of both? I know that it might be complicated because you have a number of different wines.
There's a lot of SKUs.
Yeah, maybe some change more, some change slightly less, but just in terms of the freedom that you have to do the things that you want or you think are right, I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure. I have a lot of freedom. Yes, I have the freedom to make the wines how I want to make them. The consistency, the style of Anthony Road is the site. We're all estate grown fruit. The way that our wines taste is the expression of the fruit that is grown, and so that is the style, and that's the consistency. With the different wines, for instance, the Chardonnay. There's the stainless steel, and then there's the barrel ferment. For the Pinot Gris, stainless steel, barrel ferment, and skin ferment. So there are styles that we've pushed, since I took over. Before I took over, there was just stainless steel Pinot Gris and stainless steel Chardonnay. We didn't really do much white barrel ferment at the time. So those things are styles of wine that I've been able to make, and then I approach the family and say, "This is what we've got, and I think this is a wine that we can create a label for," and they let it happen. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So sorry. Now you can go back. You were still talking about your relationship with how you ended up where you are. How is it that now in your story you are the assistant winemaker? When did Johannes decide that he was interested in moving on and pursuing his own brand? And what was the transition for you? I assume directly into the head winemaker position. How did that all pan out?
I became the assistant in 2008, and at that time when I moved here, Johannes had already purchased the land that Kemeter, his brand, is on right now across the street.
Yep.
And part of him coming to become the winemaker at Anthony Road was, he told John and Ann that I'll do this, but my dream is to have my own place, and I would like to work towards that. And they supported that.
Well, that's great that he was able to be clear with that from the very beginning.
Yeah. So early on, he had purchased the property, and so he already had that. So then it's on his end, it's building that, brick by brick, hypothetically, metaphorically, and so it took a while. And things started to get real for him probably he had an immigration issue, trying to get a green card. It was a whole ordeal for a couple of years, and at points it didn't look like it was going to be favorable, like he was going to be able to do it. But it happened, and he had always told John and Ann that the moment that I can't give you 100% for Anthony Road is the moment I have to step away.
Wow. Well said.
Yeah. And so now I've only worked at one place ever in the wine business in production, and that's at Anthony Road. I came into it, I was already 35, and, now look at you. I mean, you're young. Everyone that's worked for me has been really young. And they've traveled the world doing internships, harvests, in all the hemispheres. And I never had that. So I was offered, Johannes and John were like, hey, if you want to do harvest abroad just to get another experience underneath, we'll support that. You still come back, you'll be the assistant winemaker, but if you want to look into that, you can. And I'm like, oh, okay. I had a young family. Giles, our son, was born. He was 5 or 6 at the time, and I didn't want to go to Australia or New Zealand. It's too far away. Europe. I've been out to the Willamette in Oregon, and I liked the vibe out there. I liked the wines, especially the whites. I felt a real kinship to what they're doing and what we're doing. The Pinots are a different beast, but the whites were I could relate to that, and so I was like, I'm gonna hit one of these places up and see if I can work the harvest. Approached Johannes. This is probably in June of 2014. I approached him and said, "Hey, gonna take you up on it. I'm gonna call the winery out in Oregon and try and set this up." And he says, Peter, before you do, John and I want to talk to you later. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So in the afternoon, we sit down, and that's when they tell me that Johannes is going to leave in August, and that we'd like for you to take over. So that's how I got that job, and it worked out better because I didn't have to go away, and now I'm a head winemaker. And at that point, I had 8 years under my belt working here. 6 of them as an assistant winemaker, and so I felt like I was ready. I learned, but I was never I never wanted to work at another place. I was never looking for another job. I was pretty comfortable doing what I was doing, and I probably would have stayed an assistant winemaker for another 2 years or something. But it just worked out.
Sure.
Like that, yeah.
I identify with that a little bit because I've not done any internships outside of the Finger Lakes either. I've worked at Ravines for 8 or 9 years, and I feel quite comfortable there too. So
Yep.
you got a little bit into the owners of Anthony Road. Will you just hit us with a short bit of history about how this winery came to be, when they first started, that sort of thing, if you have that off the top of your head?
Sure. John and Ann moved up to the Finger Lakes in 1973, purchased this farm.
Wait, do you know when John and Ann were born? You have to start there and then follow.
I know Ann was born in 1944.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
John's a little older, a couple of years older. 1973 is when they moved up here. They purchased the farm here. This was the Anthony farm, right? This is Anthony Road here. All the roads on this side are, at least in our neighborhood, are named after the farm family, the family that farmed the land. And so the Larzilier across the way, Nutt, where we have our other vineyard, NUTT, that was the Nutt family. So they purchased about 100 acres on this here on Anthony Road. They came up to grow grapes. John was going to go to law school. He had a friend that said, "Hey, up in the Finger Lakes, you can go grow grapes, and live a pretty good life." And they were like, "Okay, let's give it a go." And Anne had lived in Rochester and Geneva previously, and they had known each other they lived in the same neighborhood in New Jersey when they were growing up. And so they moved up here. 1973, they started planting grapes. In 1973 and 1974 for Taylor. Everybody was working for Taylor then. That was the gig. And they were growing hybrids for Taylor. John was working, got a job at the experiment station, and Anne was managing and tending the vineyards.
Wow. And
they were raising their kids here. They had a few more kids, when they moved here. They have 4 children, and today all 4 of those children now run the day-to-day business of Anthony Road, and John and Nan are still part of it as well.
Well, it's interesting to think back to the way that you had described the feeling here on the property as being like a big family. And I will say from my experience, it's clear that I would say more than almost all other wineries that I know of in the area, they have a very familial feel from an outsider. I know that they have the family lunches every month and that sort of thing. And imagining this family that has 4 kids and they're all involved in the business makes it seem clear why. I mean, it is a family. To work here, you're in and amongst their family.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to get you off topic.
Yeah. In the 80s, early 90s, most of the growers are starting to see a shift as Taylor gets purchased by Seagram's, and the emphasis of their productions now are moving to the West Coast. And so you've got a lot of growers that had contracts with Taylor, and they are purchasing less fruit every year. And it wasn't a drastic cutoff, but
a slow, sad decline.
Yeah. And so what you see today is the ripple effect of that. At the time there was Wagner and Glenora on this lake. I guess Weimer would have started in the 70s as well. And then, but you didn't have the trail. You didn't have all, what we have today. And so it was a fight or flight. What are we going to do? We're growing the grapes. Now, one thing that John and Ann could see was that the taste, the American taste for wine, was shifting into European style and from European grapes. And so they began to pull out the hybrids that they had planted for Taylor. The only remaining vines on the farm are the Vignol, which were planted in 73. Those are our oldest vines.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they started to replant with vinifera, Riesling, Chard, Cab Franc on this farm.
Wow. So they must have been some of the very first adopters in the region.
It was early on, yeah, but you also have you've got the Wagner family that is growing vinifera and grapes way before them. The Stamps, Lakewood, but they're definitely one of the pioneers of the industry, at least post prohibition, post Dr. Frank, because I think you gotta go right there to start to understand what's happening today.
Sure.
Yeah. And then they opened the tasting room in 90 with grapes from the 89 vintage. And presently, right now, we manage two farms, the Martini Family Vineyard and the Nut Road Vineyard, which is about a half a mile down the road, just on the other side of 14. And we have probably about 90 acres of grapes, lots of different types of grapes and varietals. And the selling of fruit is a big part of the business as well. We sell fruit to a lot of people. Yeah.
I hope someday it will be me. I'm going to get on that list.
Yeah.
I'm going to come pick some of these tasty grapes.
I gave you the number. The Daly grape.
Okay, great. So now the rest is history. We're into modern times. Yep. Peter Becraft's head winemaker, and Anthony Road's killing it. Now I'm hoping to ask you some of the specific ways that you relate to the wine and some of your practices in the cellar? Anything that you're willing to share and isn't an industry secret, of course.
Yep.
That's sarcasm. There's not a lot of industry secrets. The first thing is when you bring juice into the winery, what kind of analysis are you doing, and how does it affect? Do you use any of those numbers to determine how you're going to treat a particular wine? And if so, how, in a very general sense? I mean, I know that we could probably have this conversation alone for a long time, but
analysis of the juice is going to happen for me with the berry sampling. That's going to be my determinant on when we're going to bring the fruit in.
So by the time you're like pressing, you already have those numbers. It's not like you're taking the juice out of the tank and then wondering what you're going to do with it. Okay.
Yeah. If we're going to do something at the crush pad, it'll be determined on taste at that point. Once we've pressed wine and the wine is settling in tank, yes, I'll get a pH and we'll get a TA and the Brix levels. And so, I'll have that information. But when you're pressing, if you're taking all the juice in, you're going to have a much different, like no press separation of press fractions, right?
Sure.
You're going to have a much different result than your berry sample.
Sure, slightly different chemistry.
Yeah, and so. And usually I'm accepting pretty much everything.
So I know some people go particularly hard on their analysis and some people don't. So like you run pH, TA, Brix, is that about it?
Yes, during the harvest, yeah.
No like FOSS machine where you're measuring grams of malic left or whatever. You don't send anything to Cornell?
No.
Heard.
No.
I know from conversations that we've had in the past, you do some native ferments and some inoculated ferments. Is that right?
Correct.
How do you determine what wines are going to be fermented which way?
I have some wines that are right now wines, wine brands in themselves that like the Art Series, that the directive for that is spontaneous fermentation. So that wine will always be spontaneous fermentation, but I move that to pretty much all the grapes that we work with as well. So not exclusively, but to have some. Whether it's Gewurz or Gris, like this Gris had some a mixture of I think I used W15 and then some spontaneous. So multiple fermentations, and those are colors on the palate. That's where my fine arts background comes in. Right. This is where the sculpture, building, construction. This is where my training, my wine training comes in.
You feel like having whatever kind of inoculated fermentation and a native fermentation maybe helps build layers of depth when you put them together? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Sure.
Or am I misunderstanding?
No. Yep. There's the spontaneous ferments have they have a different acidity. The way that the spontaneous yeast, the native yeast metabolize acid is a little different. So it tends to hold on to it. Even if even in reds, they go through ML, it's brighter. There's more of an acid backbone to it.
Really?
Yeah. And with the Rieslings, that's there as well. So there's and it's also a very textural acid. So that's a little bit different. There's going to be different fruit aromas, flavors. There can be also with reds. I find that the spontaneous ferments are they coax more color, much darker.
Are they slower?
The ones in tank, white wines, yes, they move slower. The reds, no. Once they get going, they get going.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think they generate as much heat as inoculated red fermentations do?
Um,
And I'm asking that in part because I'm trying to read into the color that you're talking about,
Yeah.
because my understanding is that between alcohol and temperature, it's going to influence color extraction. And I'm surprised to hear you say that native fermentations coax more color out.
Yeah. They may take a little longer to start.
Yeah.
That is for sure. They take longer to start. But once they get going, they can go pretty fast. Also, a lot of my red ferments are in pump overs and tanks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're outside. So and so say like Cab Franc. Cab Franc is coming in mid to late October, and it's pretty. The nights are cool.
Yeah, I would be worried.
And so those ferments get pretty cold. The juice gets pretty cold, but they're still going.
Sure.
They don't stop.
But
they just go a little slower. So I think that also extends that maceration time. They're not getting that, all the effects of what you were saying, from the heat and everything, but they're still going.
Do you have to bring those fermentations inside at some point, or do they finish in tank? I'm just thinking about the idea of trying to have a wine, especially a naturally fermented wine, speaking as somebody who's never really had to deal with a natural fermentation before, so
Mm-hmm.
it takes on my ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to imagine that as the fall gets deeper into winter, that some of those wines are going to want to finish. I mean, do you struggle with that? Or what's your workaround?
So far, no.
Really?
Yeah.
The reds will just finish on their own?
Yeah.
Do you press pretty dry, or do you press with any fermentation left to go?
Mostly dry.
Mostly dry.
Yeah. On occasion, press it off earlier. That may, and I'm not sure why I would do that. It may just be for because it was it just made everything easier.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, logistics drives a lot of decision making in the winery,
Right.
so totally get that.
Yeah.
There was just something else on my mind. When it comes to punch overs versus pump downs, I know this question is probably going to be variety specific, or oftentimes the answers are variety specific, but how do you approach your cap management in general?
If I can, I'm going to be fermenting reds in tank with pump overs. But comes a time in some vintages where you have filled said tanks plural, and you still have a lot of fruit, and then there will be punch downs in bins.
Of course.
So we'll have that as well. But the majority of what we're going to be doing is going to be pump overs and tank, and I like that because I find that that the process of the pump over it creates a wine with more pronounced fruit. The color extraction is more. It's the punch downs ferments in bins. In my experience, they're darker, not necessarily darker in color, but the profile, the fruits and smells and tastes are darker. There's more savory, earthy, licorice types of things, where the ferments in the tanks are more overt fruit. But not at the expense of lack of tannin. They're not soft. They're still structure. Yeah. That's my preference.
That's super interesting to hear you say. Just for anybody who might not know, the difference between a punch down and a pump over is to wet the cap of grapes that form on top of a red fermentation. A pump over is exactly what it sounds like. You pull wine out from the bottom of the tank and splash it over the top to wet the cap. And a punch down, you're taking a tool to submerge it a little bit. I'm wondering, it's interesting to hear you say that your choice between pump overs and punch downs is basically dependent on the vessel in which the wine is fermenting in. I kind of have two questions based on that. The first is, based on your experience, is one more extractive than the other? And I asked this, I know that you kind of explained what you're feeling about the difference, but typically when people have talked about, when I hear other colleagues in the industry talk about punch downs versus pump overs, they talk about it like, well, I really want to go hard on extraction, so I pump over a lot because I really want to extract as much as possible. And certainly it makes sense that there's a logistical aspect to it, but it seems like people, at least in my orbit, take for granted that, or just assume that they're used as tools to aid in extraction. And is it your experience that one extracts more than the other, or have you said all that you have to say about how it affects the wine stylistically? And I'm just beating a dead horse.
With the pump overs, I feel that I get more extraction. Although, I only pump over once a day. I pump over more, but that's a process, and harvest is a very busy time of the year.
Do you have the tanks that have like the tube that go up to the top and allow you to? Okay,
I do. Yeah, but mostly we're just running a hose up and over.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and that's also helping aerate the wine as well, and with punch downs, we'll get to them 3 times a day.
Oh, so you really punch down?
Yeah.
Wow.
Three times a day. It used to be 2, but now we do 3 times.
Regarding your philosophy on additions in general, I'm not sure if it's worth going into each of them individually, but let me ask you a couple questions, and you can give me all the information that you think is relevant. Do you chaptalize here?
I do.
Chaptalize again is adding sugar to increase the alcohol. Typically,
on occasion, the last time was 21, and that was for Lemberger red wine and Lemberger rosé and Cab Franc red wine and Cab Franc rosé.
Were you seeing a lot of fruit that year that had lower than typical sugar numbers?
Yes. Yeah. Everything that year came in at sparkling wine numbers.
Okay. Yeah. So is it your feeling that you need the alcohol to be at a certain limit because it has stylistic impacts on the wine?
In those cases, yes. The Pinot Noir from that year, the resulting alcohol was 10.1.
Okay.
Right. But with Pinot, and especially finger lake Pinot, it's such a light expression. I felt like I could get away with it.
Sure.
With Cabernet Franc and Lemberger, especially for red wine, a 10% Cabernet Franc is weak, right?
You feel like you can feel the difference texturally.
Yes.
In the
because
lack of alcohol?
The alcohol also, that's providing structure to the wine as well, and it needs that. Nobody I don't know if nobody wants, but I don't want.
Sure, it's a stylistic choice that may come down to preference to some degree,
yes.
but you feel that this is appropriate.
Yeah. Now all of the whites that year, I didn't touch them. So depending on how far they went down, with Riesling it doesn't matter. Right, it doesn't matter with Riesling.
I'm surprised. Did you say that you chaptalized rosé?
I did. I chaptalized the rosé as well.
Was you feeling the same thing, that you wanted it a little bit more?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say weight, but I'm not sure that that's what alcohol brings. Texture or some part of the balance.
It helps with weight as well.
You think so?
Yeah, and so the style of rosé that we do at Anthony Road is, I pick for rosé the same day I pick for reds, right? So I want ripeness of fruit. I want a little bit more alcohol. I want lower acidity. I want there to be weight, and there can be a little tan in there too. And so my decisions for the red wine also dictate the decision for the rosé.
Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Are you practicing acidification or deacidification?
No. But when I first started, right, there was a lot more tweaking going on, not just here but all over. There was a lot more tweaking. There was a lot more chaptalizing to get to a certain number,
Sure.
a 12% alcohol.
Was
type
that because
thing.
it was at the time like the supported philosophy? It's just what people were doing,
Yeah,
as opposed to changes in varieties or
Yeah.
changing in the temperature. Or
yeah,
something like that.
and also I think it was sustaining a consistency, and getting past making consistently really delicious wines.
Sure.
So that there was a lot more tinkering and tweaking going on. I did learn how to deacidify here, whether it be with double salt correction or potassium bicarbonate. And every once in a while, there would be something that was tweaked. What I do now, right, is I accept more of the press fractions. So those higher press fractions, the pH is higher, right? There seems to me to be and definitely in a really fresh, crisp beer, I'm going to be accepting everything because that's going to help me balance, lower that TA, raise that pH a bit. And in terms of acidifying, I think the last time we acidified something was maybe in 12. And that was, that was a year that was just warmer. And so I can't even remember what we used it for. But I will tell you that bag of tartaric was just finished last year because I would use that when we soused barrels.
That bag that was like used in 12 or whatever has been sitting around that long.
Right.
Well, I'm thinking that maybe the way that I'm asking it is not the best, and maybe the question should be phrased more like, given the right year, would you practice acidification versus deacidification? Which is, I don't mean to ask, are you a winery that acidifies or deacidifies every year to hit a very specific pH or TA, but more so, are you philosophically against it, that sort of thing? Because I know that, there's a line and people fall on one side or the other sometimes.
Yeah.
Which I don't mean to ask the question again. I think that you've answered how you feel. I'm just thinking out loud about
right
my experience.
If I need to intervene, I'm going to intervene. But I also feel like as a region, as a farm where you're growing the fruit, what does it say if every year the fruit that you grow, you need to fuck around with a little bit before you can even ferment it?
Yeah, it's maybe not a good look.
Right. And also, letting go of that is scary. Making that step, I was scared to make a 10% alcohol Pinot Noir. Wasn't what I was going for, but it's not a wine that goes out to distribution like Cab Franc and Lemberger does, and Rosé for us. And so I knew that here in the tasting room it's going to be fine. So no, I don't acidify or deacidify anymore. And very rarely, the last time I had to chaptalize was 21.
Okay.
But I'd rather not.
Sure. Just to follow up on your point, my opinion is that the belief that you need to change a juice's pH, TA, bricks, something about it, to hit a very narrow mark, as I think kind of an antiquated view. And I think that in modern times, people are accepting that given the vintage variation that we have here in the Finger Lakes, alcohol goes up and down, acid goes up and down, and I think that's for the benefit of the region. Everybody in the wine industry is blessed to be in serious vinifera growing region. You know, it's not like we struggle to do that here based on the numbers that we're seeing.
Yeah, the grape growing has grown leaps and bounds. The knowledge, the practices, the culture it's still can grow even more.
Of course,
right? And you know, back when I started, the consistency of fruit and coming from was very variable. You know, throughout the area. So the need to do a little bit more, you know, help at the crush pad was more common and more accepted and probably more needed.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And I don't think it's as needed, at least in our situation. It's really not needed at all. But like I said, you know, I'm the maker of the wines, and there are a lot of people riding on what I do. You know, in this family, right? This family's business. You know, and this business has a reputation, and so I can't play around with that. If I need to step in, like a parent, I'm going to step in.
Sure.
And we're also now getting into this this phase here, this shift, this paradigm shift where people are doing nothing, right? They're
to their wines. You mean?
Yeah. They're adding nothing, doing nothing,
and parents probably too. But let's not go down that.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? You can tell
in the wines and in the kids.
You can tell
totally.
Yes.
To finish up talking about nutrients, or to finish up talking about additions, what's your nutrient regimen? I know we've had this conversation in the past. DAP versus Fermade versus both. How about there to start?
Yes, I use Fermade K.
Is K the one with DAP in it?
It has some DAP, yeah. Yeah. But K is also the one that is less expensive, right, than the other ones.
Is it?
Yep. And that's what we've used when I first started working here, and I found no reason to change it. I haven't noticed. I have at times used Fermade O. I've used the other the yeast nutrient buildup. That took forever. Don't have that time. And honestly, I noticed nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your philosophy in when to add? Do you add a specific rate to every tank, kind of regardless of the situation? Do you let a tank talk to you? Do you start with adding 0 and then let a tank talk to you and add it as it needs? What's your feeling?
Yeah, I'll split the addition. Usually maybe 15 grams per hectoliter up, not up front, but once it starts going, and then as it starts to drop, add the 10 gram per hectoliter, all within that first third of the fermentation there. Sometimes I'll add the 15%, but there's everything's healthy that year, and it'll get past that point, and so it just gets a little bit. Some years, it gets its allotment of the Fermade K, and then it's still stinking, right? So then that's when I'll come in with some DAP. After that point,
sure.
I'll give it some DAP, and the numbers aren't. I think the allowed allotment's 150 gram per hectoliter. So I'll start off 25 gram. What does that do per hectoliter? If it's still stinking the next day, another 25 grams. Usually at that point, you start to knock that down. Yeah.
Are you ever put in the position to practice any fining?
Fining, the only fining that I'll do is bentonite fining.
Okay.
Yeah.
You never
for heat stability.
You've never felt the need to do like egg whites for tannin or anything like that? Nothing off?
No. We have in the past. When Johannes was here, we would run some trials. Very rarely did we do it, but it definitely does not hurt to do trials.
Sure, of
I mean,
course.
that's why you have a lab.
Right.
That's why for those people that aren't doing anything, make a you got plenty. There's no excuse. You got plenty of time to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
What are your feelings about lees and their interaction with the wine? Do you practice aging on top of lees? If so, are they like the super heavy stuff, or are they just light? Your stuff in barrel versus your stuff in tank? All that.
Mixture of both light and heavy. Lately, I've been there have been some ferments that I'm not racking off the gross lees. Those have to smell good, taste good.
You taste the lees, or you at least
no. I'm tasting the wine.
Do you ever sample the lees to see what they're about?
Sometimes, yeah. And it's mostly a smell.
Sure.
You can get everything you need by smelling.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, Wes tastes them, but he's a freak.
Yeah. That's right. And then, but everything will, I will keep wines on lees for as long as I can. Yep. Whether it's gross or fine.
What's your feeling that the benefit is to doing that?
Well, there's a protection. I feel that it gives it. I also feel that
from oxygen,
it provides, and it provides a texture, and it helps to create the perception of a weightiness. But the texture is something. So when we're racking tanks, right, getting something ready for filtration, bottling, if there's clean, really nice lees, fruity lees in these tanks, we will take the lees and we will use that to top up barrels.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll introduce more lees into those barrels, and that's been a real benefit. It's really helped.
That's a great idea, because it's not wasteful, but it hurts sometimes to top barrels with wine, and to know that then that wine is going to have to sit in a partial container, because you're basically you're losing wine to evaporation, and it just feels like it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
So to top with lees is ingenious. I'd never considered that, because then it's not going down the drain; it's going in the barrel, and you're saving a little wine in the process.
Yep.
And probably helping those wines in barrel.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm interested because we're just tasting this Pinot Gris, and to me, it has a lot of texture. Are you, when you're doing lees aging, are you doing any stirring to integrate those lees, or is it just basically sitting on top, and once they fall out, they fall out?
Yeah. There's no regimented stirring of the lees, whether it's in tank or in barrel. There will be obviously some stirring with SO2 additions, but no, there's no. I don't do a lot of bâtonnage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is 2022 Pinot Gris. Is there any RS in this? The texture is so lush. I'm trying to figure out how you got it like that.
Yeah, the RS is, I think, about 4 grams.
Okay, so not very much.
4 to 5 grams.
Okay, yeah, it's super bright and delicious. Okay, couple questions for you.
That's the fruit. That is the fruit. That is the ripeness of the fruit
of the Anthony Road.
That is the fruit. That's what brings that. So, yeah.
Of all the compliments that I could pay, well, Anthony Road, and by relation, your winemaking, consistency, to hear you talk about consistency totally rings true to me. I think that Anthony Road has a very distinct, clean, delicious style, and whereas it's easy to find inconsistency. I mean, we all have our vintages or specific wines, or, maybe there was one block of Pinot that got weird and, unfortunately got a little funky. Anthony Road is amazingly consistent.
Thanks.
So you touched about the Art Dry Riesling, which is one of my very favorite wines that I've drank from Anthony Road. That Riesling is killer. Right now, are you really selling the 16 vintage?
Yes.
So it's 2024 right now. That 16 is absolutely incredible. And I kind of want to ask a couple questions on it, but the first and most important one is, what's the difference in intention and also the difference in vinification between having that versus your dry Riesling or semi-dry Riesling? I think that the Art has a little RS. it seems like, let me approach this a little bit differently. It seems like the art Riesling is one that's intended for aging, and does it go for a slightly higher price point?
Yes.
What do you do differently in the cellar to that specific wine that helps it stand out?
Well, first of all, the fruit that's going to go into that wine is going to be clean fruit. There can be there can be some clean botrytis, some good botrytis in there. It's going to at the crush pad. It's pretty simple. It's coming in machine harvested. Goes right into the pressed off. Depending on the year, if it's a challenge like 21, there will be SO2 added into the juice. Probably in a year like that, it's going to be 50 gram per hectoliter, or 50 gram per liter. Sorry, and then for a really clean vintage like 22, I probably didn't add anything.
You didn't add any SO2 at press? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you're adding SO2 at the press pad is a decision that you make based on the cleanliness of the grapes or the vintage or something
correct.
like that.
Yep.
Okay.
So then it clarifies I'm racking off pretty clean. I will introduce some solids because the yeast needs something to cling on to.
Sure, you bring up their turbidity a little.
Yep.
Does that just mean sucking a little bit of the most fine stuff off the bottom as you rack it?
Yep.
Okay.
And then the important part is whatever vessel it's going into, that vessel gets topped up right to the very top. So there's no oxygen in the equation.
Oh, that's right, because you're going to allow it to go native, so the fermentation won't be particularly vigorous, so you're not too worried about having headspace, otherwise overflowing it.
I'm worried about having headspace, yeah. So that's why I top it up. Once it starts, it lets you know, right? It starts to foam up and comes out the fermentation lock. And then all you really need to do is drain a carboy. And these ferments aren't vigorous; they're not foamy. They go at their own pace. They go slower, so usually it's just about five gallons. If not, then I'll do 2 carboys. And then you let it do its thing. I will assess nutrients. If it needs it. I definitely will give, and these, you've walked into a cellar when it needs it. Each tank will let you know.
Oh yeah,
they talk to you. And
it's one of my favorite things during harvest is to find a reductive tank and to be able to give it a nutrient addition.
Yeah.
And then God willing, the next day you walk in and it smells beautiful.
Fruity.
It's like I'm done for the day.
Yeah.
Like I've done all the important things that I need to do, and I'm happy.
And it's also one of those things that when they stink, and that's when you get somebody from that comes to the cellar that wants to visit.
What does it smell like? Rotten eggs in here.
Jeez, you don't smell that? So that's pretty much that wine. That wine. Now it's not just one tank. I have multiple tanks, all different sizes, and also barrel. The art series will ferment in barrel as well. It used to be a couple tanks. But from one specific spot in the vineyard, now it's every lot that comes in will get its own expression, and it will be done in tank and barrel. So then, when the wine is done, so each one of those, they're going to be different. They're going to be different fermentations, different expressions, and some of them, in some cases, they may stop. in the 2015 was a situation like that. It stopped at 50, 40, 48 grams. And it's not where I would have stopped it, but it was valid expression of Riesling. That's a great thing about Riesling. Bone dry, dessert wine sweetness, everything in between. It is a valid expression of Riesling.
Yeah, it really wants to be Riesling.
Yeah, and I mentioned the how the acidity metabolizes, right? How it's fresher and more mineral and textural. It could hold that weight. So there was a rush of sweet, ripe fruit on the palate, but the finish was really cleansing and mouth puckering, not puckering, watering. So the art series, and I'll just kind of that's one that I'm not pushing into a specific style. So the art series is kind of differs. Some years are drier. The 15 was the sweetest. Some years they're in the teens for RS. Some years is I think the current releases we have now are the 16. I think is at about 18 grams, and the 18 we also have the 18 released. That is maybe at 21 grams.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not necessarily that it's hanging out in that style. It's just really what's the best expression that year.
Sure.
Yeah. And now, then we'll do blend trials, right? When we're creating the wine, a lot of those fermentations, right? The art series is something that I make not a lot of, maybe a couple hundred cases at the most, but we have fermentations for a couple thousand cases. So the dry Riesling and the Riesling are made up of those spontaneous fermentations, as well as fermentations from other yeasts that I use.
Interesting.
Yep. So we build the wines up.
I'm struggling because I'm writing down more questions that I want to ask you as you're talking. At first, it sounded like are the grapes that end up being art Riesling, is it determined that that's an art Riesling lot before it's fermented, or are you making that decision after everything is done and you're tasting through the tanks and you're thinking to yourself, this is like this is like this, and for this reason this is the art Riesling?
When the project started, when this wine started, and with the 09 vintage, and pretty much until Johannes left, it was one specific block. And in specific, it was 3 rows from this block.
Okay.
Yep. And
is that still the way it is?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. In 14, when I took over, I was interested in how the other blocks would express themselves. So that's what happened. So fruit from Nut Road and from the Martini Vineyard, each block that comes in, we will, some will go, I'll add yeast to, others I won't.
I see.
So there's a lot of, there's a Martini Vineyard expression. There's a Nut Road expression. Those get blended into the final expression usually. And then the whatever doesn't make it to make that wine, that's the first wine we're going to make. No, not always. Not always the first wine we're going to make. But a lot of what doesn't make it into that wine goes into the other ones.
Sure.
Yeah. And we do that with Gewürz, the barrel ferment Gewürz, dessert wines. I do small amounts of it with Cab Franc.
What do you do?
Just the spontaneous fermentation. Those kind of things.
Another one that I wanted to ask you about specifically as I was perusing your website was the Martini Becraft Selection Vignoles.
Yes.
Is that a dessert wine?
Yes.
Because I noticed it said the raisinated berries.
Yeah, that's a TBA.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the specific questions that I wanted to ask you was, I imagine that when you press that juice, it's got a lot of sugar in it.
Mm-hmm.
Did a native fermentation have trouble going through that wine? Was there so much sugar that it struggled to ferment?
No. Nope.
It worked okay.
Yeah, it worked beautifully. Probably the pinnacle of any wine that I've ever made.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll have to pick up a bottle next time I'm here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't toot my own horn, but it's stunning. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question that I wanted to specifically ask you was about closures.
Yep.
I know Anthony Road. Do you exclusively use screw caps?
Yes.
What are your feelings on screw caps, how they relate to cork, and specifically what I'd like you to get into a little bit is ageability of wines under screw cap.
Yes. We started using screw cap in 2012, I believe. And that was because we got a new bottling line that had a capper as well. Before that, it was all cork, all different types of corks.
Did it also have the ability to do cork?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it still does. It's the one that we have, the Castrol.
Oh, you just could start using screw caps for the first time.
Yep.
I gotcha.
And when in 14 was the first year that we went exclusively to screw cap, 100%. Reds and whites, rosés.
What was the impetus for that?
The impetus was I was having the years before we were having some real issues with cork and taint and variability of corks, and it wasn't like we were buying cheap corks, and so for a winemaker's dinner that we had, I opened up a case of TBAs that we had made in 2008. They were all under natural cork, and 3 of those wines were corked.
Jesus.
Right? And those were $100 a bottle, half bottle, split. And then you could open up a case of another wine, and you had 3 wines that were exactly the same and 8 wines that were different. It's the consistency that screw cap can give you. Now,
these corks in question must be natural corks.
They were natural corks, okay. Yes. Yeah, DM wasn't a thing. It may have been a thing, but it wasn't a thing in the discourse at that time.
Okay.
Noma cork was a thing. We had used some Noma corks.
Are those synthetic?
Yeah. And the Noma corks come a long ways, but they almost looked like they were kind of like a cigarette filter.
Yeah, I know the ones.
And when Johannes got here from Germany and started working here, he also in Germany they were going through a bad time for corks, and there was a lot of TCA, and in his family winery and wineries that he was working at. And so when he came here and the technology for this new cork that won't give you TCA, it was like, okay, let's put a lot of wines under in this new cork. And yet the rate of oxygen exchange in there was very high. And some beautiful wines that were made were they aged out super quickly.
Ravines had the same experience. They were using some of, they may have even been the same cork for all I know, for some of a certain number of their wines, like some field blends and things. And when we've done verticals in the past, there's a year difference where they went from the synthetic corks to natural corks, and the difference in how fresh versus how tired those wines are is remarkable. Yeah. It's kind of unfortunate. I can understand the time and place to use those products, but
yeah, if I were to go back to cork now, I've had some. I have used DMs when the pandemic hit. They stopped making the dessert wine, the one we were just talking about there. The bottles for it, the Altus bottle. I had bottled half in screw cap, and then the pandemic hit and couldn't get any glass. And when the plants came back online, they were doing limited runs, and they phased that bottle out. So I had to put the rest of what didn't get bottled into a cork finish. So we have that in both, and I use DMs then. And I've had good luck with those. And I had Vinny does a lot of Vinny from Billsboro, who also makes wine here. They have a lot of vertical tastings at Billsboro, which are really fascinating. And they, I think their first vintage was in 06, I believe. And so they may have wines from 06. They've been under DM the whole time, and
Wow.
and they some of those wines are so fresh, super fresh still,
God.
and they're at least 12, 14 years old. It's really so, and those were DM5s.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's the DM5s, 10s, and so on and so forth.
Which presumably the higher the number, the longer the cork should last.
Yes, and who knows what a DM30 does? You haven't lived that long, right? You tell me.
Sorry. So now
screw cap.
Yep.
So, but at that time in 14, I wanted consistency. I know how the wine is. That goes into the bottle. That's how I wanted to present it to you. And with the screw cap, we could get that consistency, and we also had 10 years under the belt with Tierce, the Riesling that we made with Fox Run and Red Newt. And that had been under screw cap for the whole time. It was always under screw cap. And in 04, think of that, a premium wine from the Finger Lakes under screw cap wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. And then that was a situation because Peter Bell had been had studied in Australia, right? And they've got a history of wines under screw cap, and New Zealand does, and South Africa does, going decades before that. And what I can tell you about the aging in screw cap, you have two different pads, on the inside there.
Under the cap that actually make the closure with the glass.
Correct. Yep, that's the sealing pad, right? That's the pillow. You have the Serenex, which is the white one, and then you have the tin, which is the metallic looking one. And the metallic looking one is cushier. That one's the most reductive, right?
Oh, keeps it the most airtight.
Correct. So you want something that you want to age for a while, or you don't want to release for a while, it goes under that. And yet all of the Tierces were under the white Serenex.
Really?
And those are so fresh.
I haven't had one of the Tierce wines for years.
They age, but they age at a slower rate than cork can.
Both of those pads, or one of them?
Yeah. It's not like that doesn't let any oxygen in.
Right, of course. Yeah. I just wasn't sure if it was your experience that maybe the Serenex was faster than cork.
Faster? How so?
Like the wine matured or saw oxygen faster, based on your experience on how you would expect it to taste after whatever 5 or 10 years or something like that. And you think they're both maybe tighter. The oxygen exchange rate is less than cork.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Do you know which one the Art has on it?
The Art series, the 16 has the Serenex.
Okay.
Yeah. I
had an experience 8 months ago, maybe, where I was in the Anthony Rowe tasting room with my family, and I tasted that wine, and it's my main data point that I reference now in my mind when I think about screw cap aging, because I thought that wine tasted practically exactly like it should. I mean, it had obviously evolved in the time that it had been in bottle, but was also like showing those really classic signs of aged Riesling. I was excited about the experience of having such a fresh, almost decade-old Riesling under screw cap to kind of cement how I was feeling about the situation.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, I will let you go. We've been talking for a very long time. Let me just ask you one going away question, which is that what will you drink for dinner tonight?
For dinner tonight...
will you have dinner with your family?
Yes.
And will you drink water or beer or wine or seltzer?
I always have wine with dinner. I'll have water too. And tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to finish a bottle that we opened a couple days ago. It's a Gamay from 13th Street in Ontario.
Nice. Yeah. I've heard great things about all the wines that I've had from 13th Street that are awesome. I would love to talk with somebody from there sometime.
Yep. I can hook you up. Jean-Pierre is a friend.
Hot dog.
Yep. And it's a great. He makes great Gamay. Ontario does Gamay really well.
Nice.
Yep.
So Canadian Gamay for dinner.
Yep.
All right, Peter, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you all so much for listening. I'm thrilled you could make it to the end of the podcast. If you have any thoughts on questions you'd like me to ask or comments about your experience, I'd love to hear them. Please don't hesitate to email me at eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.